On tonight's episode of Locked On Lightning, the Bolts pick up a couple of wins over the weekend. Does this change things for the Lightning? We also take a look at the schedule ahead. All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Dankert. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Just a reminder, today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. On this episode, we're talking about the pair of wins that the Lightning picked up over the weekend. A little surprising there. I'll tell you why. As well as we're going to ask ourselves, are the Bolts back? The answer might surprise some of you. As well as we're taking a look at the week ahead. What do the Lightning have in front of them after picking up those back-to-back wins on this very short, I guess, tri-state / Philadelphia road trip? We get into all that, but before, I just want to remind you all, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube, so hit that subscribe button, drop a comment below, and let us know how you're feeling after the Lightning picking up those 2 wins over the weekend. And if you want to join in the live chat, we are now on Discord as well as on Reddit, so see below in the description for more details regarding that. So I went into this past weekend. So if you didn't know, the Lightning played back-to-back games in the tri-state area against the Islanders and the New Jersey Devils, 2 teams that are very, I would say that they are in the wild card race as to what their chances were going into these games, in terms of, how we view them as a legitimate threat. I think going into these games, I think that they were, especially the Devils with Jack Hughes. And, really they're a team that is just the goaltender away, in my opinion, from being one of the better teams in the East. The Islanders, a little bit of a different story. They haven't really been able to get it together this year consistently. But nonetheless, the Lightning needed to go into this set of games over the weekends with winning intentions. I went into it with the expectations with this 3-game road trip that the Lightning were going to possibly lose 2 out of the 3. That is not the case anymore, obviously, with them winning 2 out of the 3 games that they have on this this East Coast road trip. And my thing about it, and this, we'll talk more about this in the second segment, or the Bolt back, but I will say that as good as a win is against 2 of these teams, especially that Saturday game against the Islanders, definitely felt, I think, a lot better. I wouldn't say better. I think it was a little bit of it meant more, because obviously the Lightning have not been playing well whatsoever. They're in the middle of a losing streak, going into a building that really, in recent memory, they have played well in. So on top of that, of the fact that the Lightning, for the most part, play well against the Islanders, I think we could say, you can never take anything for granted when you're looking at the Lightning going into any sort of game, especially when they're not playing well, as a guarantee for them to play well. They go in, and I'm not going to recap the whole game. If you want to go back and look at the recap, you're more than welcome to. But basically what I took from it is that, the Lightning go in, they score 2 goals in the first period. Awesome. It looks like, the Lightning are I wouldn't say back in terms of what we've come to expect out of them, but more so that they're back in the way that they're doing the right things. And then you fast forward to the third period there, and within a span of 4 minutes, because mind you, the Lightning are going into that third period with a 3-0 lead. Just to throw shout outs, goals from Paul, Cooch, and Point. And I said going into this series, this set of games, Point needs to keep going. Cooper needed to stop shuffling him around. A bunch of you agreed with me and even went a step further and said, how do you expect these guys to build chemistry or keep the chemistry they have if they're being shuffled around? And you're 100% right. But you go into the third period, Lightning have a 3-0 lead. Okay, you know what? I think a lot of us expected going into that period that, all right, they're going to give up a cheapy one. You know, Vasilevsky, he's not having a great game. He's making saves. He made a couple of very good, tough saves early on. He was doing what he could, and not. I wouldn't say that. I would say that he was doing what he needed to do in this game. And then Anders Lee and Brock Nelson make this a very close game. I think we could agree when the Lightning have a one goal lead, it's pretty much a tied game, especially late because the Lightning, for whatever reason, cannot manage, are just incapable really right now, or have been all season, of not being able to play a full game. And that's really the troubling thing that comes out of this, is that even when this team wins, we're still seeing things that are concerning. And like I said, we'll talk about more about this in the second segment, but that was a game in which I just feel like it further highlighted how thin this team was. And you could see it, you know, the top players, the Kucherovs, the Points, the Vasilevskys, just your main guys, they could only do so much. They could only so much carry you throughout the course of a game. And but a win's a win. And, you know, I'm happy that obviously they got out of their rut. And then, you know, you go into Sunday's game in Jersey, which, you know, not a crazy building to play in. But like I said, a team nonetheless that goaltender away from being something of a serious foe out there in New Jersey. And they go into that game with a little short in the way that, you know, you're not playing Vasilevsky, which I kind of figured if he wasn't going to play in one, if he was going to play in one of those games, he wasn't going to play in the other. I would have probably, if you would have asked me ahead of time, I would have preferred him to play in this Devils game, just because, in my opinion, the Devils are the better team. Then again, you know, the Islanders are a little bit more rough and rowdy. They're a little bit more physical. They have a little bit more of an edge to their game now that they have Patrick Waugh as their head coach. And you have Sorokin in net for the Islanders, who is, I think if they do the right thing in front of him, he's, on any given night, he could look like one of the top 5 goaltenders in the league. So we go into this game, and like I said, against a Devils team that I think is a little bit more equipped. Now, from what I've heard, Lindy Ruff is kind of pretty much already has one foot out the door there, which seems like at least the fan base is not happy with his performance there. It's, you know, quite understandable, the expectations for this team versus where they are at this point in the season. Johansson played well, as for what you would expect out of a JoJo performance. I thought for the most part the team played well in front of him. I thought the defense was pretty solid. This was kind of a game in which, other than the second period, both teams were kind of, I wouldn't say they weren't trying to take chances, but they weren't as aggressive as you would have thought especially the Lightning with coming off of that win. You would have thought they would have had a little bit more pep in their step. But I thought it was very good to see out of them in that third period, kind of controlling the game or taking the more of a controlled approach to the game, especially when they weren't doing that well in the faceoff circle. They still limited the Devils to 3 shots on goal in that third period, which says a lot, not only about where the Devils are right now, but the fact that, the Lightning pretty much were in full control at that point. And I feel good about it. I feel good about this win. I feel good about both of these wins. I will say, as a little preview before we head into the first break, I will say that back-to-back wins, whenever you have them, it's a good thing to have. It's a good feeling to have, especially when you're not playing particularly well. But I will say that it doesn't feel as good when it's against teams of this caliber. And I'll get into more of that in the second segment, or second period, if you must, of this podcast episode. So just a little bit, we'll break that down. We'll ask ourselves the question: are the Lightning back? The answer might surprise you, or it may not if you've been a listener of this podcast for quite some time. So coming up in a little bit, we'll talk about that. But first, let's talk about our first sponsor of today's show, and that's our friends over at Camino Consulting. Now, our sponsor is one of the best resources out there for anyone if they want to learn how conflict resolution. You've heard of our online families and couples course and taken advantage of Locked On's 25% discount running at the end of the month. But what about the live seminars in both sport and business? The challenge in differentiating candidates and recruits is an endless battle. Everyone can demonstrate their measurables and qualifications, but we all know it is the intangibles that matter when those things are similar. Contact Camino Consulting for their team and management seminars to get a peek behind the curtain and watch your next recruiting class of hiring group become one of the most effective you've ever seen, because you've identified the right candidates and because you've learned how to communicate and motivate them in accordance with their own preferences. So go to Camino Consulting right now and take advantage of the 25% discount that we got going for all of you. So go to www.caminoconsulting.ca. Once again, that's www.caminoconsulting.ca. So as always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube, so drop that comment below. Let us know how you're feeling. I mean, back-to-back wins, it must make you feel a certain type of way. Hopefully it's a positive way. For me, I will say, I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer or a negative Nancy. I was talking to one of our listeners on the Discord channel, I think I also tweeted to one of our listeners as well. But basically what I was saying to both of them was, I mean, you can't discount, 2 wins are 2 wins. That's phenomenal. That's great, especially after the ridiculousness that has ensued over, let's say, the last week for the Tampa Bay Lightning. I will say, though, that, like I hinted at the end of the last segment, as good and as big as these 2 wins are, you can't help, especially at this point in the season, you can't over-celebrate it. Because you look at the 2 teams they defeated. Now, if it was, let's say, those 2 wins against the Bruins and the Avalanche, that's one thing. That's obviously when those 2 wins occurred a couple of weeks ago. We were ecstatic. We were over the moon. We were talking about possibly the Lightning going and winning the division. That's obviously maybe not in the cards for them anymore, given how bad they have played since then. As we all know, getting absolutely blown out at home by the Panthers, losing to the Senators, and losing to the Capitals all at home. And you go on the road and, you're playing well, which is great, but that is also another concerning thing, is that not only is this team not winning the games that they should at this point in time, because I feel like once you got out of those Boston and those Colorado games and you won those games, that you kind of were, I thought we were all past that to a certain degree, because the Lightning were playing so well. And the fact that it takes something as little as a little hiccup, because listen, by the logic that we have seen this Lightning team play, they play well. They win a couple of games in a row, and then they lose and it falls apart. And I've been saying this for the past couple of seasons, because if you've been a listener of this show, this is something that I've spoken about quite a bit over the last couple of years. Was that really that, this is the Lightning's inability to just pick it up where they left off, and I kind of hinted at it a couple of weeks ago when I lost it on an episode. I basically said good teams don't do this. And the Tampa Bay Lightning, and I will reiterate this now, are not a good team. And if you don't even have to look at the Florida game to know that. If you look at the Islanders game, and we've seen the Islanders quite a bit this year, so we kind of know what to expect out of them. And the Islanders are a very heavily covered team, and they happen to be an Eastern Conference team. So you hear about them quite a bit if you're, following general hockey news, whether it be social media accounts or news outlets. For the most part, you hear about them quite a bit. And you know that there is a lot of weirdness with that franchise, and that they don't do the right things either in terms of adding personnel the right way. And what I'm trying to get at is that we shouldn't be celebrating a win against a team in which the Lightning, quite frankly, could have blown that game. I think if Patrick Waugh doesn't pull the goaltender, I think he pulled the goaltender with like a minute and a half, which is absolutely insane. I am still very much against, pulling your goaltender that early. Basically, all you're doing is giving up earlier. The fact that the Lightning kind of fell asleep there in the third period against a team that really, quite frankly, has no business, especially with what the Lightning have done recently prior to the Panthers' loss into that 3-game skid that followed. The Lightning should have outplayed the Islanders, and we didn't really see that for a full 60 minutes. And so to answer the burning question, are the Lightning back? No, they are not. They are not until and I don't think we're going to see it this year. And I that's the hard truth there, but it's the truth nonetheless. They're going to have to do a lot more to really convince me, and I think really convince a lot of other people going forward, to show that they are back. Because when you look at their schedule, and we'll talk about more of that at the end of the show, you look at their schedule coming up, other than Philly and coming up. I mean, if you go into March, the next team that you could say that is a quality team is Philadelphia. And so and then you have a very tough 3-game stretch at the end of the month there with the Rangers, Panthers, and Vegas. It's going to be a while before we could really confidently say that this team is not only back, but really what we mean by that is playing well consistently. And that is something I think we could all agree on that they have not done at all this year. And when they do lose, that's part of it too, is playing well doesn't just mean winning games. It means playing well in losing efforts. You look at all the other teams in the NHL that are very good teams, especially the teams that we could look at and confidently say these are Stanley Cup contenders. Those teams, there are very few nights in which they look like average teams. As for the Lightning, there are nights even when they win when they look like an average team. And really what it goes back to, and it's going to be really a conversation that is going to be had beyond the deadline, is the Lightning's, what do they got in the arsenal other than outside of maybe the second line? Because you look at this whole team from top to bottom, from the forwards to the defensemen, very depleted. Sergachev is out for the remainder of the year. Possibly, if the Lightning make it that far, he could make it come back in the finals. But we're not even going to have that conversation. And then you look at, Chernak. I'm not sure what his deal is. I mean, this team with the injuries, it's already starting up. If the Lightning have been very fortunate this year, where they haven't gotten too heavily affected by the injury bug. But really, the point I'm trying to make is the fact that there's probably a handful of players that make that have an effect on this team on almost a nightly basis. And maybe we're sounding a little selfish here and spoiled, but really the Lightning need more than just a handful of players to be the nightly contributors. So let me know in the comments below, how do you feel about these 2 wins? Does it make you feel better about what this team is? Has your opinion changed? I know a lot of people started to agree with me in terms of maybe sell at the deadline. Right now, as of now, I still think that the Lightning should stick to the plan as pick up Hanifin, maybe a forward here or there. You could refer back to our trade target list episode, which is the previous one before this. I think the Lightning should sell, but also improve themselves by picking up other players. I think that's the right thing to do, especially when they don't have a plethora of draft picks. So let me know how you're feeling about all that. And coming up in a bit, we're just going to take a look at the schedule going forward for the remainder of February, as well as taking a look at March and what does that mean for the Lightning going forward in their wild card chances. But first, coming up, let's talk about our friends over at the Sleeper app. Now, it is the halfway point of the NHL season, Lightning fans. And the Lightning are, I think we could agree, are in kind of hockey limbo. Are they going to make the playoffs? Are they not? It kind of varies from week to week now. These last 2 wins really helped them a lot, where they kind of separated themselves. But regardless of where the Lightning are in the current standings, I'm going to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on the Sleeper app. I do it all the time myself. I got done with, I don't know if I could do the regular hockey fantasy, but Sleeper is the number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you could win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. You could pick players like Nikita Kucherov and Braden Point to record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minuses, and more in a given game. So use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. So one last time, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Go ahead, check us out on the channel, subscribe, hit that thumbs up button, and drop a comment below. If you want to reach out to the show, reach out to our Twitter account at LO_Lightning on Twitter. And then, if you want to get in on the conversation and you don't want to go on YouTube, go ahead to our Reddit page as well as our server on Discord. It's Locked On Lightning Podcast. Check that out. So we just got done, evaluating these 2 wins. We just got done talking about how really the level of the opponents that the Lightning beat in those 2 wins, the Islanders and the Devils, in my opinion, and I think it's still in a lot of Lightning fans' opinions, it doesn't change really much for this team in terms of what they should do going forward. Now, I'm sure there's some in the franchise, because that's just how humans work, that their mind has completely changed, or their outlook on this team going forward has changed. Now, as it stands of right now, recording this around 9:30 Monday night, the Lightning are 7 points ahead of the Devils, and the Red Wings are a point ahead of them in that first wild card spot. And you're looking at the rest of, the Maple Leafs are a little bit ahead. They're 5 points ahead of the Lightning, 4 ahead of the Red Wings. Now, that's the frustrating thing about this, is that this is the time of the year where we expect teams, obviously, of course, the Lightning in this scenario, to more so be just fine-tuning their craft, polishing things off. And that's not what it is. We're kind of reinventing the wheel after every loss here. But the Lightning, like I said, have helped themselves out over this last weekend. The Devils don't look like a team that can sustain this trend for much longer without being completely out of it. The Islanders are, I think we could agree, are one of those teams as well. I mean, you look at the teams below the Lightning in the standings real quick. Devils, Capitals, Penguins, Islanders. If you want to throw Buffalo in there, that's fine because they're coming up on the schedule. Those are teams, you look at it and you ask yourself, what do they all have in common? And that is lack of goaltending. Now, there is some talk that I have heard that the Devils might go after a goaltender at the deadline. As for who that might be, I'm not entirely sure. It could be Marc-Andre Fleury for all I know. That would be an interesting trade. And I know he has a lot of input on that, and it seems like he's very happy in Minnesota. So I don't know if that's a move he's going to want to make. As for other goaltenders around the league, I'm not entirely sure who would exactly be on the move. Maybe Jacob Markstrom. I don't know if that would make much of a difference, especially with the Lightning currently 7 points behind the Lightning. The Devils 7 points behind the Lightning. But who knows? Weirder things have happened in this league. But looking ahead, really, that's why it's important for the Tampa Bay Lightning, as we always kind of overstate, for them to win the games that we should they should expect themselves to win. So, like I said, they're on kind of a tri-state / I guess, insert Pennsylvania, Philadelphia in that road trip. They're facing Philly tomorrow night, and then they're back home on Thursday against the Buffalo Sabres. We'll get a look at Sean Walker and see what he's all about, especially now that he is obviously listed as one of the top defensemen that could be moved at the deadline. And then beyond that, obviously we all know that the Buffalo game, that's a game that you need to win. And that's also a game that the Lightning could very well lose. And then we could be going into the weekend against Montreal talking about how the Devils have played better and they're creeping up on the Lightning, and the Islanders haven't played well either, and Red Wings have not played well in that time, and that's a lost opportunity, which it would have been. But we'll see. I'm trying to stay optimistic, but I look at the games coming up, and March is for the most part a very calm month. The Lightning get a lot of days off between games for the most part. Like I said, they have Montreal this week, this upcoming Saturday, the 2nd, and then they have Calgary the following Thursday on the 7th. And then really the first big test of the month is Philadelphia at home. Philadelphia has been playing very well, a team that a lot of people, including myself, did not think we're going to play this well this year or even get remotely close to a playoff spot. And here they are, 3rd spot in the Metropolitan. And then after that, you have 4 days off. And as we all know, the Lightning do not play well with a bunch of days off. But this time of year, not the worst thing, especially if you're coming off a loss, which is not a far out occurrence for this Lightning team. So you look at after the Philly game, I hinted at it before. That's where it kind of starts to get hairy for the Lightning, which is why it's so important that they start really the month of March on the right note and end February on the right note. If the Lightning could go over the next 5 games winning 4 out of 5, which is really not an impossible feat to accomplish for this team, I think that not only will that set themselves up well, at least in the wild card standings, and potentially put them back in the division play, I think that, really it's very, very important considering you have the New York Rangers, you have the Panthers, you have Vegas. The Panthers game and the Vegas game are both on the road. As we all know, the Lightning are just, you can't trust them really. And there's no such thing as a guarantee, but that's why these games, every game is important, especially those 5 that I just stated off before the Ranger game. And then you have, kind of a reprieve, which take that as you will. After the Vegas game, you got San Jose, you got the Kings, you got the Ducks. That's a West Coast trip right there. And then you're back from the West Coast trip, got 2 days off, and bam, you're at home against Boston. And then you got the Islanders to round out the month of March. So really, it's kind of like a up and down in terms of what you're going to get on the ice. But as we know, every team that comes onto the ice against the Lightning, regardless of their record, not only is it not a guaranteed win game, but it's also a game in which we know that those teams are going to bring their best, and which is why the Lightning need to pretty much play nearly perfect. And that goes for everybody on this team, including the goaltender. Vasilevsky, I think we could all agree, has been really a big disappointment this year. You kind of would have figured with those extra 2 months off that he would have had a little bit more steam, but it just seems that, he does have his moments where he plays, where he makes good saves, but he hasn't been playing like an elite goaltender. And I know that's a tough pill to swallow for Lightning fans, but it's the truth. And it's going to be very important for him to get his act together in the next couple of weeks. If he could put out good quality performances, it will, make things easier for this Lightning team. And I am saying that, definitely aware of the fact that the defense has not been good in front of him. But at the same time, how much longer can we make excuses for Vasilevsky and say the defense is not playing well? To a certain extent, or to a certain point, you got to look at your goaltender and look at this guy and really try to justify the money he's making. You're paying this guy a ton of money for a goaltender, for a guy that is not playing that well. His numbers might look good on paper, but he doesn't pass the eye test, and that's the God honest truth. So really, this is going to be an interesting couple of weeks, especially with the trade deadline happening in the middle of that. So if the Lightning choose not to make a deal until the trade deadline, any player that they bring in, we will not see them until that Flyers game on the 9th. So even though my explicit opinion has been that they should bring that person in a lot sooner rather than later. So a lot of questions to answer, a lot of lot of interesting things that are going to turn up over the next couple of games, and hopefully that, we could see an uptick not only in the win department but in the productions in terms of how these players are playing, and it won't have to be just a massive overhaul. And hopefully that we see something out of Julian Brees-Boss sooner rather than later, so we could kind of get the ball rolling on Lightning 2.0 this year. And obviously you could find out all the information and news as it happens right here on Locked On Lightning. And so go ahead, subscribe to the podcast, give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form, and we'll be back tomorrow to preview the Flyers game. It's going to be a very interesting game. I think a game that I'm confident that the Lightning can win if they play the right way. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.